What's going on, guys? Robert with Copperstate Tackle here. We're gonna change gears a little bit and we're gonna do a how-to video. As a lot of you know, I like to film and I do a little bit of filming. And I work as a freelance videographer in my spare time. I had the opportunity to fly out to Saginaw Bay and film some professionals, some elite guys, MLF guys. During some of the downtime, I got to talk to them in depth. And I always ask them a question like, what technique or, do you have any secrets that you can let me know about? And I want to say 5 or 6 of them talked about mid-strolling. And a lot of you already know what that is, but we're going to break down how to use it, what gear to use, and what baits to use. So a lot of you know what hover strolling, mid-strolling is all about, but there really is a difference between the two. So with hover strolling, you're using a hover hook and a nail weight. It's usually lighter weight and you're fishing pretty shallow. With mid strolling, you're using a jig head and a bait at a 90-degree angle line tie for your jig head, and you're utilizing your forward-facing sonar. You don't have to use forward-facing sonar, but it helps a lot. And what you do is you see suspended fish, you cast out and watch your bait sink down to those fish, and you give it slight pops, up in the air, to the side, down, however you can to keep it just slightly above those suspended fish. It's not to say that you can't catch fish off the bottom, but for me personally, I've had better luck when those fish are suspended above trees, in the middle of nowhere chasing shad, or if they're not on the bottom, but like suspended off of the bottom. So for mid-strolling, what you'll need is a jig head. Now, a lot of people say you need a round or ball head jig, but I've found that as long as it has the 90-degree line tie, it works. And with that line tie, it keeps the bait horizontal and more natural in the water. So one of the jig heads that I like to use is just a Kitech jig head. Now, depending on how deep you want to fish it or shallow is the weight that I use. You can use 1/8, quarter, 3/16. It's really up to you and where your fish are positioned. Another jig that I use is the Dirty Jigs Finesse jig head. As you can see, it still has that 90-degree line tie that keeps it nice and horizontal in the water column. As far as baits for mid-strolling, you need anything that is a shad profile and it has a pintail or a fork tail. And there's a couple of baits that I like to use personally. The first bait that I like to use is a Deps Sakamata shad. You can go 4, 5 inch, even 6 inch, but it has a nice forked V-tail. The bait is really soft and it gives a nice side-to-side action in the water. Another bait that I like to use is the new Crush City. This is the pearl white. I think this is called the freeloader, and it's just a pintail. It comes in a variety of different colors, and I like this one a lot too. Another great bait to use or alternative to those two, the Missile Bait Spunk Shad. This one is just a pintail. It has more of a Kitech body. It's more round, and it rolls really, really nice in the water. This is the pearl white freeloader from Rapala and their new Crush City series. But as you can see, I'm holding it still, but that tail is just wagging on its own. It has a lot of action. The flat sides give it a nice little movement in the water as well. As far as gear, you want to use a spinning rod. I personally use a combat stick by Evergreen. This is the older model. I haven't had time or money to upgrade to the new one, but this is just a regular 7/4 medium spinning rod. I've got 12-pound braid on it with 6-pound fluoro. Now you can use, 8-pound fluoro, 7-pound, anything you want, but you want a lighter setup and you want a softer tip to give it that action. As you can see, this one's all rigged up. As you can see, I've got a 3/16 jig head on there with a Deps Sakamata shad. I believe this is the 5 inch. I'm holding still, but that tail is already moving on its own. So when you cast it out there and you give rod tips, that bait is just moving side to side. It's rolling in the water. The benefit of mid-strolling is when you cast out and you see those fish, you work the bait with the rod and you reel in the slack. So because you're throwing it on a lighter jig head, that bait is suspending there and you're working it over the fish, which makes them come up and eat it. Now, with a jerkbait, it's kind of similar. You're targeting suspended fish, but with the mid-strolling, you're not moving that bait fast and out of the strike zone. So if they're lethargic, not in the mood to eat, this is a great way to trigger and get those bites. Because you're working it so slow, that bait is just sitting there side to side, side to side, side to side, and it's staying in the strike zone longer, allowing time for those fish to come up and eat the bait. So just to recap, you need a finesse jig head, your choice in weight from 1/4, 1/8, or 3/16 ounce. But the key is to have that 90-degree line tie. You'll need a shad tail bait that's either a pintail or a V-tail, and it's your choice of color, preferably a shad color. You'll want to throw it on a spinning rod, 12-pound braid, 6 to 8, maybe even 10-pound line, depending on if you're fishing heavier cover. And the way you work it is just rod pops. Now, if you need to hold it down or to the side and rod pop, that's a good way depending on how deep those fish you're fishing for are. Copperstate Tackle has a great selection for all the things you need to mid-stroll. You can get them online at copperstatetackle.com, or you can go in the store and check them out yourself.